Hello, genealogist. This is Craig, and this is Just Genealogy. Many times people come to me and say, I just can't find the land deed, Craig. And they ask me where it is, like I know. And many times they don't understand some of the maybe basics about land deeds. They've been searching for their ancestor's deed, but they've been coming up empty-handed and they're frustrated. Something like, that the ancestor was living in a certain place, so they should own land. They don't have to, but there is always the possibility that somebody owns land. And the census or some other record says they own land, but you just can't find it. So with the census piece, maybe you're able to identify neighbors. So at least you know the neighborhood where it is. But that's not an easy thing to do. So in this video, I'm going to tell you why this might be happening, why you can't find a deed. First of all, let's go back to basics for just a second. What's a deed? Well, a deed is a document that transfers land from one person to another person, from one individual to another individual. Now, that transfer of land can be accomplished by a variety of different documents. Could be a court action, could be a will, could be a deed. There are all kinds of things. But generally, it ends up in the land records somewhere with some explanation as to how it got there, maybe. But it's not necessary that it gets there. And sometimes, especially when it's an inheritance, the deed may not be registered until it's time to sell the land. Because when you register a deed, sometimes you have to start paying taxes on it, that kind of thing. Kind of sneaky way to get out of paying taxes, but you always get caught. So when someone transfers land individually from one individual to another, that individual creates the first individual, the grantor. The O means owner. That's one way to remember it. Is the person who you basically can identify how they got the land originally. You can identify them selling the land to somebody else because that's an individual selling land to an individual. So the grantor sells the land to the grantee, and there you go. There's the deed between the grantor and the grantee, but you can't find where the grantor got the land. So there is another document out there that may be the reason why you can't find the land. And that could be that it's a patent. Now, a patent could be also called a land grant. In the case of military folk, it could be called military bounty land. There are a variety of different opportunities whereby the government gives or sells land to an individual. And that's why you can't find the deed for that individual that happened to. You can find the deed when they sell it, but you can't find the deed where they got it because they didn't get it by deed, they got it by patent. So that deed that gets created when the patentee sells the land to that individual to individual, that's called a first deed. So first deeds don't include the sale of the land from the government to the individual. First deeds are sales from individuals to individuals. So remember that a patent and the variety of patents that exist transfer land from a government entity, like a land office, general land office. Could be colonial, could be state land office, to an individual rather to another entity. And it could be state, could be colony, could be state, could be federal. It doesn't matter because it's the government that owns the land to begin with. And the government doesn't have deeds, they have patents. Now, there is a time when the government does have deeds. That's when the government, for example, there's a military installation, they need land, so they buy the land from the individuals. They may exercise eminent domain. They may do a variety of different things, but then there is a deed to the government. But when it comes time for the government to sell the land again, it's done by patent. It's not done by deed. So land deeds and patents are two of the most common types of land records to search for, but they have unique differences that can affect where to search for them. In places like Virginia, outside of the Northern Neck Proprietary, you would look in Cavaliers and Pioneers for patent information. Inside the Northern Neck, Lord Fairfax's proprietary, you would look for abstracts of Virginia's Northern Neck warrants and surveys. And that's important that you remember that when it comes to patents. Not only do you want to look for the patent in the land office records, you also want to look for the surveys, because the surveys will tell you a lot more information than the patent will. For example, the first patent in Loudoun County, the Northern Neck warrant, says William Barr lapsed from Thomas Davis 30 October 1740 to 16 April 1741 for the Davis of Prince William, 507 acres adjacent Major McCarty, Major Tuberville, Hutchison, C.C. Thomas Owsley, and Thomas Wilson. Survey Amos Janney. Note Thomas Davis has no heirs in this country. N.B. No improvements made on this land, nor in any wise occupied. 26 July 1765. My late husband Thomas Davies surveyed this land, and I understanding it was almost wholly included in other people's patents, neglected to clear it out of the proprietor's office and let it lapse. My present husband, maybe I should put my glasses on when I'm reading. That would be helpful. My present husband, William Barr, resurveyed and found a part clear of other parts and wishes deed. I consent my former husband, having no heirs that I know of, signed Judith Barr before James Nesbitt. Second survey for William Barr, 17 December 1764, 265 acres on Cub, alias Salisbury Plain Run, adjacent Thomas Davis surveyor, Colonel Francis Lee, Major George Toberville, Francis Asbury, now Colonel John Talos, C.C. Benjamin Mason, and Henry Robinson, Maker James Paul, Surveyor John Huff. That's a lot of information, and you wouldn't have gotten that from a deed. So anyway, there are some issues that you may have to deal with in all of this. It could be that this courthouse burned, and sadly, there's a lot of record loss that we have to deal with, especially if you're researching in the South. So if the courthouse burns, many times people will come back at a later date after the courthouse burning and readmit their deeds. So this means you may be looking for a deed in 1810, but there was a fire in 1840, and they brought the deed back in 1850. And yeah, the name's there, but it's 1850, and your guy was dead by 1830. You still need to look. And then there's the issue of the land passing through the family, just like the circumstance that I described in the Bern County. So you want to make sure that, what I try to do is try to identify where the land is today, and then do something like a title search that takes me from the land today back to it. Now, that's not as easy as you think it might be, except in places like Maryland, where the title search is part of the deed. At least that's my experience. I don't know whether that's changed or not. So you want to, if the land has been passed down by the family, you may not find a deed at all until it comes time to sell it. And then you find that the deed that you're looking for is the deed of sale. It could be, again, that the deed was not recorded until decades later. And I've seen that, where, 50, 60, 100 years goes by before the family records the deed, because it's been passed through multiple generations. and not necessarily by will. They could be intestacies, where it's just by law the land has been transferred um, because of heirship, and it varies how it varies. Now, before the revolution, usually it would just go to the first son by law. After the revolution, it gets split up. Could be the deed was never recorded. You can sometimes find collections of unrecorded deeds. We have in Loudoun County a book on unrecorded deeds. Uh, there, there's also loose deeds in courthouses that somehow they're not in the deed books. And the unrecorded deeds, because they weren't recorded, aren't in the deed books either. And of course, when somebody goes and writes a deed book out, publishes a deed book, they don't include the unrecordeds, largely because they may not even know about the concept of unrecorded deeds. There's also the possibility that the deed could be misindexed. So you want to make sure that you know the spelling variations. You want to, and sometimes I've been known to go through an entire deed book and just page by page, see what I could find, because I couldn't find what I was looking for. And on rare occasions, I'm actually able to find it line by line, or I find another deed where, when they index deeds, they don't talk about the people who are in the deeds necessarily. So it's only when somebody goes to publish it that that happens. Of course, with AI on Family Search, we may have better luck finding people who are described in deeds. But sometimes the deed can get recorded in error and misindexed. And there's always the possibility that you're looking in the wrong county. I mean, if you're in Loudoun in what William Barr was 1740, Loudoun doesn't exist in 1740. That's Prince William. And after that, it's Fairfax. And then after it's Fairfax, it's Loudoun. So you have to, again, you have to know county formation in order to know that you're in the correct county, because the seller could have bought the land in a different county and the land didn't move, but the county did. And then there is the point that I brought up earlier, that it could be a patent. So you need to make sure that you look for patents when you can't find deeds, especially if they're early. You knew I was going to say that, right? The other thing another way to look for patents, especially federal patents, is to use the BLM patent search. And I put every single one of my ancestors prior to 1900 into the BLM patent search, male and female. And you never know what will show up. And in fact, I have found not where they acquired land, but where they acquired the right to land and they assigned it to someone else. And the patent will tell me that this is military bounty land based on military service in the War of 1812, or military service based on the Revolution. Remember that that military bounty land ends in 1855. Remember that the Homestead Act begins in 1863. So I'm not sure what happened in between. I'll have to go figure that out someday. Maybe that's another video. But remember that there is a difference between deeds and patents. And you want to make sure that you're looking in the right place for the right type of land record. And as important as land research is, and I know it can be tricky, it will in fact solve many of your problems. If your ancestors were, we'll say, rich enough to own land, you've got to find that land and you've got to create that in and out table. And just a second on the in and out table, remember, in one column you put everything they bought, another column they put everything they sold, where it went, how they got it, how they got rid of it, who got it, who they get it from, and at the bottom of it should add up to the same number. And if it doesn't, now it can be an acre or two off, but if it doesn't, if it's not in the ballpark, you're missing something. And always pay attention to those descriptions, because you may be able to place them on a map on a land, especially if you can find maps with creeks. Because especially in colonial times, a lot of creeks, because you're not going to find that white oak tree or the blueberry bush. But anyway, so much fun. Helen Leary told me once that all the problems in genealogy could be solved by land deeds. And my experience is that a good number of my problems have been solved by land deeds. So remember, they're deeds and they're patents, and then they're courthouse burnings and wills. So this has been Craig. This has been Just Genealogy and another video put to bed. Thank you all so much. Have a great evening, morning, or afternoon.